Hey everyone, I am super excited to be here today, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to dive into ambassador programs with you all today. So let me start off by introducing myself. I'm Kaitlyn Barnard. I work in developer and community marketing for open source, currently at Kong. Before that, I was at CNCF, where I worked really heavily in the Kubernetes community and still do. I'm co-chair for SIG Docs, where I lead the Kubernetes blog subproject. And then I always like to throw in a dog picture. So this is Bruce, as in Bruce Wayne Batman. He just turned 8, so his birthday party is happening this weekend, which is probably the best example of the type of dog parent that I am. So like I said, today I'm going to be talking about the basics of building an ambassador program from scratch. However, a lot of the themes that I'm going to go through are relevant no matter where you might be in your community building process. So when it comes to community building, I very much believe that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So today, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is my personal approach based on 2 examples of ambassador programs I have run, the Cloud Native Ambassadors and then Kong Champions. So Cloud Native Ambassadors is CNCF's ambassador program. They are currently at 106 ambassadors. And the first time I did this talk, we had 50 ambassadors across 14 countries. So I'm going to be referencing examples from the earlier days of the program. I know for some people, this example can be a little bit intimidating if you're just getting started, because CNCF has really experienced hyper growth over the past few years and has a pipeline of contributors from over 19 projects. So I'm also going to compare that to a newer program that I'm working on now, which is Kong Champions. We just launched this in May 2019, and we are at 9 champions across 5 countries. A lot of the examples that I'm going to be talking about are also going to be referencing open source and use some open source terminology. If your product is not open source, anytime I say contributor, you can essentially replace that with user. All of the examples should still be relevant whether you're open source or not. For Kong, our champions program is actually both made up of open source and enterprise champions. All right. So let's say you are thinking about starting an ambassador program. When does it make sense? So I a lot of times see that leadership teams are saying they want to have an ambassador program, but they haven't really fully thought through the goals, how this fits into their overall community strategy. And that's a really tough position to be put in as a community manager, to have to manage those expectations, especially if it might not be the right fit for your business or your community at this time. So there are 2 indicators that I like to look at before we try to start one. And the first is there a clear path to contribution. So your contributor pipeline has to be really healthy before that can feed into your ambassador pipeline, because these are the candidates you're going to be pulling from. You really can't have active ambassadors if you don't have active contributors. And this goes for users as well. You really have to have an active and engaged users to pull from. And then second, do you have internal buy-in to support the program? So ambassadors require a huge amount of support and resources from you internally to make them effective. Is your organization willing to support that? Do they understand the value? And at the end of the day, do they really care about supporting the community to that extent? Awesome. So setting goals for the program is the #1 thing I like to do, because going back to what I just said, it ensures that it fits into our strategy. And 2, it helps get buy-in, because this is what the entire team is agreeing to work towards. So these can differ between communities a bit, but for me, it's almost always these 4. We want our ambassadors out in the community creating awareness for what the technology is. We want them educating the local and global community on how to use the technology. We want them helping to expand that contributor pipeline or bringing in new users by sharing their journey and helping others get started. And we want them to grow personally and professionally by being part of our community, because at its core, this program should be rewarding to them. All right. So now that we've got our goals, how do we start building our ambassador program? And there's 4 initial things that I like to do. So the first is reaching out to those people in your contributor pipeline. So not only are these your potential ambassadors, but you can also get in touch with them and find out what they would want out of an ambassador program and build around that. So For CNCF, we started with people who were already doing this on their own and established in the community. So people who were hosting Kubernetes meetups and then built the program around that. For Kong, we started with our most active contributors and users of the project and then built around them. The second is do your research. So what other communities exist in this space? What's working for them? What might not be working? How can you differentiate? A lot of people are in multiple communities at this point, so you don't want to have the exact same replica of another program that they're in, but you also don't need to fully invent the wheel. Third is establishing the value of your community. So what are the value that you're providing? Like I said, people are in multiple communities. What is the value you're providing that those other programs don't? And then this isn't the ambassador's full-time job, so it's really important to clearly communicate what exactly it is that they're going to be getting out of it. And then finally, figure out how you're going to promote your program and get new ambassadors into it. So my best advice for this is to reach out to people directly, not just the GitHub users or contributors that you know, but we've reached out to people who have written blog posts on us, people who we meet at conferences that we think would make a really great ambassador. People always like to feel special and invited, so it really doesn't hurt to ask. The worst thing that can happen is they say no, and then that might provide some really valuable feedback for how you can make your program more compelling. All right. So when first starting out, these are the key pieces that I like to put in place at the very beginning. The first is a program overview. So this should outline what it means to be an ambassador, what do they get out of it, how is this a benefit to the greater community, and then have that located in some type of central location like GitHub or a community hub, whatever that might be for your community. The second is requirements and expectations. So again, this isn't a full-time job for them, but there still should be clear expectations prior to someone joining the program as to what's expected of them, whether that's 1 blog post per quarter, hosting 2 meetups per year, et cetera. Essentially, how much time should they expect to be contributing to this role? And then in the case where they either don't or are unable to meet those requirements, what happens? The third is a code of conduct. So these people are acting on behalf of your organization or your project's behalf, and working within a diverse community of individuals. So that code of conduct helps create a welcoming community and sets forth the values that you want your community representatives to adhere by. It also does then provide documentation in case there is a complaint issued against an individual so that you can respond appropriately. And then fourth is resources and training. So ambassadors need to know what they're talking about as they're going out and advocating on behalf of your project. And we like to provide that content in forms of presentations like slides, recordings, demos that they can use. We also have monthly calls where we help familiarize them on what's new with the technology and help train them on it as well. All right. So then once that's in place, there's some additional elements in the day-to-day management of the community. I'm going to talk through these at a high level today, but happy to dive into any of these further if anyone is interested after this talk as well. So for the application process, I really like to figure out the lowest barrier to entry here. For us, it's typically a Google form, but it's important to keep in mind that that can't necessarily be accessed everywhere. And if that's the case for the tool you choose, make sure there's an alternative in countries where that might be blocked. On the form, we also ask ambassadors what they're interested in. So for example, writing or speaking, because some people don't like to be on stage in front of people, and some people don't want to write blog posts. So I'm going to get a little bit more into these in a later slide, but this lets us help tailor the opportunities to an ambassador's individual interests. After that, it's time to set up the review sessions with your decision-making committee, whoever is part of that, and decide a few things. So how many applicants can the program reasonably accept? What are the admissions periods, and what qualifies someone for acceptance? Having that clear review cycle and status updates really sets expectations for the community as to when they'll receive a response. And then that helps also mitigate some of that disappointment if they aren't selected during that round, since we oftentimes can't accept everyone, because then the process and expectations are clear. For onboarding, I like to do a variety of options here to cater to different people's preferred learning and communication styles. So I typically do detailed welcome emails with everything they need to know to get started. So this is where you can reiterate the role, expectations, code of conduct, all that documentation. I also like to add in a monthly onboarding call. So this helps ambassadors get to know both you and other ambassadors. It's just really great to meet face to face when first starting out. So, they can kind of put a face to a name and you're not just a stranger behind an email. And then I also like to detail all of this in an onboarding deck for ambassadors. It's a lot of information to take in all at once. And then within the deck, in that central community hub or whatever you have, they can go back and reference it at any point. Monthly ambassador meetings, these are a really great way to get everyone together for both networking and learning. So monthly typically tends to be the best cadence for the communities I've worked with, but this could be as often as you'd like. For CNCF, we used to do these exclusive for ambassadors. It was always a mixture of project updates that they should know about, as well as some type of knowledge share. So some type of topic for the day where they could share, meetup best practices with each other and learn from each other. For Kong, we do this as a community call. So this actually isn't specific to our Kong champions, but for the whole community. We do demos from community members on open source technologies outside of Kong, or we do Kong project updates and demos from our engineering team, including sneak peeks on our upcoming releases. For day-to-day communication, it's important to remember we all work in a global community, and I really like to have clear channels of communication set up because they're not just for updates, but they are to make sure ambassadors can connect with each other as well. Things like private and public Slack channels, an email alias, a GitHub repository for info that requires transparency and accountability, and then discourse for any type of evergreen questions that might impact other users as well. And then finally, I am always thinking of ways that we can remind our ambassadors that they really appreciate what they do for the community. So we do things like ambassador swag at either when they join or at our yearly events that kind of identify them as a community resource and help recognize them for their contributions. At CNCF, we did front row keynote seating, so that was kind of like exclusive access for them. Face-to-face meetups, so some type of happy hour, breakfast, reception at in-person events. It really provides that VIP experience and gets everyone to meet face-to-face when there is that opportunity. For CNCF, we used to do free access to exams and workshops if that's something that you have. So ambassadors were able to take the CKA and CKAD exams at no cost to them. And then finally, meetup reimbursements, so or meetup sponsorships, if that's something that fits into your strategy and budget, that's really great to be able to provide as well. In the next slide, I'm going to talk more about how we incentivize specific types of contributions as well for both champions and general contributors. I am going to talk about more tangible incentives today, but Corinne's overview of intrinsic motivation in the previous session was awesome. All right. So whether it's an ambassador or contributor, like I said before, these people are contributing their time for free. So how can you help thank them and make them feel seen? And then similar to what I said before, giving them the opportunity to grow both personally and professionally in this role as well. So at Kong, we have the concept of code contributors and non-code contributors. You might be familiar with this if you've worked in like the Kubernetes community before. Code contributors quite literally contribute code to the project repo. And then non-code contributors create content like videos, blog posts. This can manifest in other ways beyond content as well, but I'm specifically going to be referencing content today. Both are equally valuable to our community, but we do balance the recognition, depending on the contribution type and what is important to that type of contributor. Some things do stay the same between the two, but I'll talk a little bit about what we do for each. So for code contributors, we do things like contributor shirts. If your PR is accepted to the project repo, you are eligible to get a contributor shirt. We switch up the design every year so you can kind of collect them all. Contributor perks, we do things like discounted access to Kong Summit, our yearly conference. We do special events for Kong champions and contributors at the summit itself. They also receive a first look at new features. Really anything that has exclusive access, our contributors and champions will get first. And then a contributor spotlight. So we highlight our contributors and champions in our newsletters and blog posts. We will eventually expand this to more fuller interview style blog posts or video series. CNCF has done something similar with like their Meet the Ambassador series, which you can check out. Hacktoberfest. So this is a little bit more for awareness for us and can sometimes be a great way to get new contributors, but we typically do a fun piece of swag exclusive for the event, and then we will align some type of project or challenge with the event for our existing community members as well, kind of like almost a holiday in a sense. And then finally, a clear path to taking on a larger role. So what does going from a contributor to a maintainer look like? What does going from a contributor to a champion look like? This goes back to that professional and personal development piece on how you can give people a clear roadmap for taking on more responsibility. For non-code contributions, in my opinion, these are just as valuable as code because these people are bringing new users and awareness to your project. So we do things like custom swag for blog posts. So for example, if you submitted a PR, you could get your contributor shirt. If you wrote a blog post, let's say, you could get a custom gorilla. Again, kind of a collect them all thing if you want to do both. Contributor perks are pretty much the same between the two. Contributor spotlight is a little bit different, so they could still, be highlighted in a newsletter email, but we also focus on amplifying the content that they're creating on our channels, retweeting, cross-posting, guest blogs, really however we can help get more eyes on their content. And then that clear path to taking on a larger role. So this might look a little bit different depending on how your project is set up, but this could either be contributor to champion, or a special role like the blog sub-project lead for Kubernetes is a non-code contributor role, for example. All right. So then finally, let's talk about measuring success. At the end of the day, the higher ups are going to care about the business impact of the program. And I think we all know the impact of developer advocacy and ambassador programs can be really difficult to communicate. So what I like to do is measure the impact of each effort. Something I hear a lot is it's really easy to measure output. So for example, number of blog posts and ambassador rights, for example. But I do personally prefer to measure quality over quantity. So a few examples of this are the growth of the number of ambassador applications to your program, and then how many of those are actually converting to an ambassador. So the quality of those applications and the quality of your program. Number of unique blog posts on content written by ambassadors. So how many individuals are you reaching with a piece of content that that ambassador puts out? Or similarly, like a meetup talk, a presentation, something like that. Meetup attendance, I like to do this almost as a CPM model. So for example, how much did it cost to get in front of X amount of people? So, how I calculate it is the cost to send the ambassador divided by the number of people there. And then I like to try and set a baseline to other programs that we're running. For example, what does our cost per lead look like for a trade show? And then downloads and signups. This is always my ideal way to measure if you have a setup in place to attribute your marketing efforts to downloads and signups. I know this is oftentimes really difficult to do with open source, but if you do have this set up in your product, this is a great way to measure.